Sage Wanderer here, coming at you from my cabin down by the creek. So, I want to talk about a story that's making headlines. And I've been following this since before anyone was talking about it. One of the benefits of having a subscription to the Sage Wanderer channel is that you've got somebody working on your behalf to dig up news stories that aren't being covered by the national news. And so I've been aware of this growing problem with the Tren de Agua gang out of Venezuela. This is a violent Venezuelan prison gang, very much like MS-13, which is something you've already heard of. And they started in prison in Venezuela, then they took over the streets in Venezuela, then they spread throughout Latin America. And since the borders have been open for the past 3.5 years under the Biden-Harris administration, we have the Venezuelan gangs taking large amounts of territory here in the United States. And I want to talk to you about how this is going to lead to the biggest gang war that America has seen probably since the 1920s and 30s. So this Venezuelan gang has made headlines by essentially taking over an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. And they're forcibly evicting, even though they don't own it, right? They've taken it over. The apartment management company doesn't know what to do with them, and they've all been evicted, but they're not leaving, and the police aren't doing anything because guess what? Denver defunded the police and announced that they wouldn't show up unless there was an active crime. And they even employed drones to respond to some of those active crimes so they can see it happening before they send anybody out. So the Denver police and all of the surrounding police forces have cut their police numbers, that they're horribly understaffed. And so they're not apparently doing a thing except stepping up patrols in the neighborhood of this apartment complex in Aurora that's been taken over by this gang. And anybody that is not affiliated to them or Venezuelan by birth is being forced out of their home. There's a city councilwoman there in Aurora who actually has been going and helping people load their cars up and load their vehicles up, and load up U-Hauls and leave to go other places because they can no longer live in the apartment that they have a lease agreement with them because they're being evicted by armed gang members. And this really made national news when some video arose showing gang members armed with pistols and assault rifles, whatever, ARs, invading a home and forcing someone that lived there to leave. So this is becoming a problem. Now, if you're a bit of a sleuth and a bit of a news hound like me, then you've probably heard of a related story that the Hells Angel motorcycle gang is headed to Colorado to deal with this Venezuelan gang in Aurora. And I dug deep into this story, which is for the most part of a lot of misinformation. So this response is being painted as patriotic or American, America first attitudes coming from the Hells Angels. But just a little bit of research will show you that the Hells Angels don't get involved in politics. They don't get involved in anything that doesn't have to do with their business unless it's personal. So if you come after or do anything to a Hells Angels motorcycle gang's family, right, and it's got to be immediate family from what I understand by the code of ethics, that then you're in trouble with the gang, and something will happen to you if you do anything to their family. Don't come after their mom and dad, their sister, their brother, right, their wife or their kids. And if you do that, then the whole motorcycle gang will come after you, right, and deal with it. The only other time they get involved in anything is it's got to do with business. You cross them up in business and violence will occur. They will fight over turf and territory with other motorcycle gangs. And for the most part, motorcycle gangs and Bloods and Crips and other African American street gangs seem to coexist. And a big part of it has to do is that their business never really overlaps much. Because in the black African American gangs, the Bloods and the Crips and other street gangs, they tend to deal in one kind of drug that is related to South America and Mexico. Whereas the 1% motorcycle gangs that are involved in drug trafficking, and I'm not saying that the Hells Angels are, but I'm not saying it, right? But 1% motorcycle gangs, the violent motorcycle gangs, that's their stock and trade, is the drug trade. And they tend to make their own drugs, right? They create the poison they sell in labs. Just look at Breaking Bad, okay? Give you an idea. Breaking Bad is kind of a story where motorcycle gangs and the Mexican drug cartel end up locking horns at various points in that fictional portrayal of the drug game in the United States. But for the most part, they coexist. The African American street gangs, Bloods and the Crips and the others, and Hells Angels and Banditos and Mongols, they all kind of coexist, and there isn't a lot of crossover. So the inside information on what's really happening with the Hells Angels, why they may or may not be riding against the Venezuelans in Aurora, what I've found out is that they kicked the wrong grandma out of that apartment complex in Aurora. That somebody's family member got displaced by this, and word got back to the Hells Angels. And I have it on strong authority that the Hells Angels are going to they're going to roll up on this problem. That's the exact quote. They're going to roll up on this problem in Aurora. They also said when they do, it won't make the news, because that's not the way they do things when they roll up. And if you know anything about that kind of 1% motorcycle gang, they're kind of big on making people disappear, right? They're not big on the big shootouts like the big shootout that happened in Waco that made international news. The biggest gunfight I ever seen in a public place or heard of in this country. And that was at the Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas. And that was a turf war. And, a blood feud between motorcycle gangs. But typically, that's the exception, not the rule. The rule is disappearances. People just, I don't know, maybe he just decided to, run off to Mexico and drink margaritas. So there can be in the business, as I understand it, of more or less quietly, but definitively dealing with threats. So the threat against the Venezuelans is in Aurora is personal. It's a personal beef. They will tend to limit the retaliation not to the entire gang, but the retaliation will be against the individuals who actually did something to the Hells Angel motorcycle gang's family member. And that's what's going on. And this idea that Hells Angels are coming to Colorado is actually false information, because they're already in Colorado. There are multiple Hells Angels clubs operating in Colorado, and they've been there for years and years. And so no one has to come there. They're already there. That's something that these other news stories are just not understanding, that Hells Angels in Colorado already got enough forces to deal with this. But there is the fear within the Hells Angels that this could turn into a bigger conflict between this Venezuelan gang, Trans de Agua, and the 1% motorcycle gang of Hells Angels. So reinforcements apparently are kind of coming from other states. If they're needed, they're just going to come and hang out and make sure everything goes smooth. So right now you don't have an open war, more like a personal beef, and it's going to be dealt with kind of quietly. So if you're looking for the big shootout at the Aurora, Colorado apartment complex, you're probably not going to get that headline. They're going to do everything they can to deal with the problem off the books and in the dark, right? But bottom line is, I wouldn't recommend doing anything unrighteous, unholy, or bad to somebody who has a family member in any of these 1% motorcycle gangs. Whether it's the Banditos, I have a lot of experience with the Banditos because I operated as a musician in Texas, and they own a lot of the bars. And nearly every time I got paid, I got handed a handful of cash for the band from somebody who was wearing a Bandito vest. And most of those bars are managed by upper-level Bandito businessmen. These are investments. I won't say that they're a front, but they're definitely, they just invest in nightclubs. So being a musician, I have a lot of interaction with them, and I partnered with Banditos in an organization called BACA, which is Bikers Against Child Abuse. So I can say that Banditos, Mongols, probably even Hell's Angels, certain members are kind of involved in the Bikers Against Child Abuse movement, where they raise a lot of money. So I played for free for BACA, and that got me some kind of recognition from the Banditos because I was willing to offer my services for free for the prevention of child abuse, right? Because I love babies, right? I love children. I'm a survivor of child abuse. So if I'm going to give my time to something, that's the kind of thing I'm willing to give my time to. So I have some insight into the moral code that these people have personally, and I'm picking up chatter on the internet that suggests that this thing going on is a personal beef, right? Basically, in Aurora. They don't really care if these people take over the apartment complex. They just kicked the wrong granny out, and now they're going to pay. This is what I'm hearing. And it's not going to make national news. It's probably not. But this Venezuelan gang is ruthless, and they may not take a slap on the wrist and one of their guys or a handful of their guys getting smoked over this. And they may declare a larger gang war. Which brings me to the other half of this conversation, which is about particularly the Crips. The Crips are OG Crips who may or may not still be fully involved in the criminal operations of these street gangs, are making videos on TikTok and YouTube, spoken a lot in code, and you can only decipher them if you understand the code. And luckily, I have a former gang member in my friend circle, so I just run some of this stuff past them, and they can confirm with what I believe the guy was trying to say. One Crip, and now there's been 4 more, so there's 5 Crips from 5 different major cities in the United States that have made a similar video concerning this Venezuelan gang. Now, as I understand it, black African-American street gangs, I don't know what to call you people anymore. I'm just, you know who I'm talking about. These street gangs, they've been forced to kind of be in bed with the Venezuelans and the Mexican drug cartel, because the dope they sling is primarily coca based. So we're talking about crack cocaine here, and all of that comes from Mexico and Central America and northern part of South America. And so they've had to lay down with these Venezuelans and the Mexican drug cartel in order to do business. But what's slowly happening, from what I hear from these videos from the Crips, it's all Crips I'm hearing this from right now. I've not heard from any Bloods. These are OG Crips wearing blue. And I believe if I got my stuff right, Crips wear blue and Bloods wear red. So these are blue-dressed OG gangbangers talking about this problem with the Mexican and the Venezuelan gangs, and how that they've had to do business with them. But what's happening is they're slowly pushing the American gangs out of the drug trade. And once again, that's why the Hells Angels beef is not business related, but the Crips problem with this Venezuelan gang is absolutely business based. They're being pushed out. They're being slowly hunted and killed. There's a lot of not making headlines hits that's happening against the Crips. This is all coming from videos. I cannot confirm these people are legit, but there's 5 different ones from 5 different major cities. And what they're calling for is a general war on the Mexican cartel and the Venezuelan drug cartel, the Venezuelan gangs rather. And that it's business based, and they're calling for the Bloods and the Crips and all of the other street gangs to join together to take out these Latin gangs that have moved up here from Mexico and Central America and South America. And that, they're saying this isn't about race, this is about business. We were coexisting, we were doing business together, now you're taking over and we've had enough of it. And there's a call to unite all of the African American street gangs against the Venezuelans. So the Venezuelans now have a business beef with the Crips. The Venezuelans have a personal beef with the Hells Angels over this thing in Aurora. And there's probably going to be more of that. The latest Crip video was absolutely about the Venezuelans taking over territory in Chicago. That a Chicago gang member, I believe to be legit, in that video talked about how if you live in or around these apartment complexes the Venezuelans are taking over, that you need to stay inside and bolt your door and not be out and about, because they're going to start hitting these Venezuelan gangs simply because they're not going to allow them to operate in Chicago and just take over property whenever they want to. And the latest headline is 31 armed Venezuelan gang members take over an apartment complex in Chicago now. We've all heard about Aurora, now this is Chicago. And so what I'm predicting is a massive gang war that's going to escalate. And the police are not really going to get involved. I really see police just standing down and letting these people fight each other. And so you're going to see, well, the Chicago guy that the video I saw just this morning, he warns them. He says, y'all think you're bad, but you're armed mainly with old revolvers and machetes and old rifles. And we got switches. If you don't know what switches is, we got switches. You better look out because we all got switches. And what he's referring to is the infamous Glock switch that can turn a regular concealable pistol, when fitted with a 33 round Glock magazine and 9mm, you can use this switch now to turn it into a machine gun, turn it into a submachine gun. And yeah, spray and pray 33 rounds of 9mm out of a Glock 17 with a switch is a lot of firepower, and it's almost equal to AR-15 level power in close quarters. In close quarters, in some ways, it's probably superior, right? Inside of a building, maybe. But so they're threatening them with these auto Glocks that they're carrying now, and so there was some very specific warnings to. They're speaking out against these Latin gangs, and specifically this Venezuelan street gang that's trying to take over some of the cities in the United States. So this is something for you to pray against. And also, as a part of this story, there is an alert now that's being sent out by certain former members of law enforcement and gang units who now work in the church security business. They help provide security for churches, and unfortunately, that's become an industry now because we've been so targeted in the past. And it's not that Venezuelan gangs have made any kind of threat against churches. And it wouldn't surprise me if they did, because they do have a religion, and it's absolutely occultic in nature and demonic in nature. So the religion behind these Venezuelan gangs is Satanism. And it's written all over their bodies. And so they might argue differently, but I know what I know how to decipher that. It's what I do, right? That's part of my training. So their tattoos tell me all I need to know about them. And I've had the opportunity to decipher some of the tattoos that Venezuelan gang members carry, and it reflects a satanic religion that's at the base of this. But that's not where the threat's coming from. Former gang officers, anti-gang unit officers who do church security now are saying that they're also seeing that there's going to be a gang war. And he didn't even have the information that I've got, that the Crips are already talking about it, that the Hells Angels are already talking about it. And the Mongols have actually also made some statements and leaked some information. I've heard nothing but crickets from the Bandidos down in Texas. So I don't know where they stand on these Venezuelan gangs. I do know that there's a riff in Houston happening, but that's between the street gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, and the Venezuelans down there in Houston. And you're just seeing an onslaught of violence being perpetrated by these Venezuelans. And what will happen is, let's give you just a what if. What if a local chapter of, say, the Crips decide to hit a Venezuelan gang headquarters and do some damage? And then one of their guys gets killed in the process. Well, these Crips are all going to end up at a church for the funeral. And that historically and according to people that specialize in this, that hitting the funeral of a slain gang member by the opposing team, the opposing gang, is commonplace. So the alert that went out to churches was step up your security, especially around any kind of funeral, because a person in your group might be loosely affiliated to some gang member, and one of their family members dies, and they have this funeral at your church, and then there are gang members present at your church for the funeral, and that's when a drive-by could occur. So this is becoming a threat to public safety. This is rapidly escalating. I see this by winter being a thing. And I'm kind of on the cutting edge of it. I actually thought I'd done a video on this, but what happened is that after all of that demonic backlash, I had made several videos, one of which mentioned this topic of this Venezuelan gang down in Aurora, Colorado. But it went to the cutting room floor. Like, it was it didn't make it up to snuff, and I ended up posting a video up last week that didn't include this topic. So I thought I'd scooped everybody, but it appears I'm behind on reporting on this. However, I believe I have more details than anyone because I've been working on this story for about 3 weeks. And I don't know anybody touching it until this Labor Day weekend. It started to hit the YouTubes and eventually start to show up on national news. But it's something that the Denver news has been talking about for about 3 weeks. So that's kind of what caught me on this, was that I started hearing reports out of the Denver local news on this Aurora complex. But a greater gang war is going to surface out of this. And you know, I saw that Civil War movie that they made, and I spent money on a movie, and I never ever do. The last one I spent money on was Sound of Freedom. I only go to the movies to watch something that I think is something I can talk about on my channel, or I need to know about on my channel. And after seeing that movie, they got it so wrong on so many levels. And the movie itself was just a ridiculous attempt to scare you with threats that Trump's going to be a dictator. And it was all woven into the storyline, and I thought the movie to be absolute crud. And I couldn't even make a video about it because it wasn't worth making a video about. But one of the things that everyone who tries to figure out what's going to happen in a civil war or revolution, there's one common thread that they all seem to miss or not even recognize in any of their fiction, is that street gangs, motorcycle gangs, and street gangs, underworld gangs, you know, the Italian mafia is less of a player than it used to be, but they're still there as well. And in past times, when the Italians were running everything, yeah, they were involved in engineering political campaigns. They were involved in intimidation and threat and blackmail. And they had a hand in the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. But for the most part, they're not as big a player in this story, but I expect them to also play a role. But one of the things that people just leave out is, what are the gangs going to do? When a civil war breaks out, these gangs, they're already violent, they're already armed, right? And the chaos that could ensue just from that source is something that's left out of fiction, like the Civil War movie that was produced last year or earlier this year. And so in future coffee talks, I'm going to factor that in. What role will the Bloods and the Crips play in a civil war? What role will the Hells Angels, the Banditos, and the Mongols, and, you know, Gypsy Jokers, what role are they going to all play in any kind of open conflict? And I really see them joining forces. I really see Bloods and Crips temporarily burying the hatchet just to deal with these migrant gangs that are taking over their territory. That a general truce, to some degree, between rival gangs is going to occur as they join forces and share intel on how to defeat this very powerful international gang of Venezuelans that has come into our country. And it's going to reach a point where it's going to be unsafe to be in any of these urban areas. And what you may not realize is that all of these gangs are present even in towns as small as Shawnee, Oklahoma. That there are Bloods and Crips and Venezuelans right here in the heartland, right? They don't have to be in Denver or Chicago or Houston. They can be in smaller, they're all in smaller towns too. So this kind of violence could break out in the most unusual places that you wouldn't expect it. So I'm offering this up to you so you can pray against it. I'm offering this up to you so you can be aware of it. And just for general information, I believe a massive gang war will erupt within the next year that has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with this powerful Venezuelan gang that's attempting to take over the underworld trade in America, and the people that are already operating in that sphere is going to have a problem with it, and that includes all these street gangs, all the biker gangs, the Italians, you know, and right now it appears the Mexican cartels and the Venezuelan cartels are kind of working together, and they may get lumped together in a response from these various different gangs in America. But a gang war is coming, and you've been rightfully warned. All right, we'll see you next time. Don't forget to support this channel. I'm able to do all this research and track down these stories and go to the four corners of the internet and able to spend time talking to people that I know that came out of this, you know, whether it's my military contacts or contacts in the underworld through, you know, connections I made in the music business, that I'm going to be able to continue to give you this information because you're supporting me with your donations. I don't get any money from YouTube, so the links are in the description. Please make a contribution to keep this information flowing and keep me on the air. We'll see you next time from my cabin down by the woods.